Increasingly electrified society, that's where a resilient grid matters most. ITC Great Plains is ensuring the greater grid can meet our energy needs now and long into the future. Learn more at itc-holdings.com.
Good evening and welcome to Smoky Hills Public Television. We are live from the studio in Bunker Hill this evening, and I am your host, Becky Kaiser. We are excited tonight to talk to a couple of people who are running for election for the 111th District in Kansas. We will be talking to the incumbent, who is from Hays, Barb Wasinger, who is a Republican, and her opponent, Democrat Ed Hammond, who is also from Hays. We're going to be talking about things that are affecting the state of Kansas and also the city of Hays. The 111th District includes Hays, as well as the nearby towns of Munger and Victoria, and a handful of townships. Our program this evening is brought to you by Smoky Hills PBS and also by Hays Post of Eagle Communications, where I am an employee. Our questions this evening that will be presented during the forum come from the news staff at Hays Post. So before we came to air this evening, we had the traditional coin toss. It was won by Barb, and she elected to begin this evening's event with the opening statement. We'll have that, and then we will go to the questions, and each episode this evening, the question and the statements will begin and last for 90 seconds. So Barb, we're going to start with you and ask for your opening statement, please.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me and getting this opportunity. All of my adult life, I've tried to make Kansas a better place than I found it. From working as chair of parish council and finance council and City of Hays Care Council, everything has led me to serve at this time. I'm honored to be your state representative for the 111th District, and it's been quite a ride for the last 4 years. I'm a small business owner, and I see how taxes, inflation, and COVID has affected our community. I keep my kids, my grandkids in mind when I make every decision, because they're the future. They're the future of Kansas, and we need to work very hard to get Kansas in the right spot for them so that they're not struggling through that. Every dollar counts, especially in rural areas, and I understand that, having run a budget for a small business for many years now. During my time in the legislature, I got the Northwest Corridor road project started. I was the impetus for it, and I used bipartisan measures to do it. I did an amendment on our ballot to stop runaway regulations and stood for paying back CAPERS funds. I get things done, and I work for you. So I appreciate your support, and of course I want your vote. So I look forward to continuing to serve you.
Barb, thank you very much. We'll move now to Ed Hammond with his opening statement this evening.
Thank you very much, and thank you to KOD and the Eagle family for hosting us here this evening. And I also want to thank the literally thousands of citizens of the 111th District who we've had the opportunity to talk to as we go door to door. It's been a wonderful experience to sit in living rooms or stand on steps and answer questions. And that process has produced two major issues that I think are common among all of the citizens that I've talked to. The first is the economy. There's a lot of concern about the current state of the economy. And second is the impact of inflation. Inflation not only on them, but the future of their children. And because of those two major concerns, I've really targeted three initiatives that I believe will have the most positive impact on the economy of our district. First is Medicaid expansion. Second is full funding for K through 12. And third is the fair and equitable block grant for Fort Hays State University. And the reason why I picked those three is that represents really the three most important employers within the district. They're the largest employers anyway. And I believe that tonight's discussion is going to make it very clear that you have a choice between a person who really wants a professional career as a politician and somebody who is basically a strategic advocator. And I hope that you will learn a lot from today's discussion.
All right, thank you very much, Ed. He will have tonight's first question because Barb had her opening statement. And Ed, you mentioned that things that you're hearing from people as you campaign, they're concerned about Medicaid, and that is one of our questions this evening. Do you support the expansion of Medicaid in Kansas, and what exactly is your position on this topic? Because I understand that Kansas is one of very few states who have asked for the expansion.
Well, it's one of the few states that hasn't asked for the expansion. We're one of 12 that haven't asked. And this is a good example of the difference, the clear difference I'm talking about. Because my opponent has voted no on SB 276, which was the last time that we had Medicaid expansion in Kansas. And Medicaid expansion has a lot of positive benefits for our district. It's a $5 million add-on to the hospital at Hays Med. It is a $2.5 million add-on to the First Care Clinic in Hays. And it would help us qualify for 340B funding in our hospital. 340B funding gets us a 40% discount on on prescription drugs. Barton County has it, Finney County has it, but we don't have it here because of the way that it's defined, the eligibility is defined for Medicaid in the state of Kansas.
All right, Ed, thank you. So Barb, let's talk about that. What is your position on the potential expansion of Medicaid in Kansas?
I am not against the expansion of Obamacare in Kansas, but I think we need to look at it in a fiscally responsible way. We need to have three things happen. One, we need to make sure that there's a workforce issue on that. They do not require work. There's no work requirement. You cannot make very much money to do that. The second thing is I want to make sure that the expansion does not push our intellectually disabled and disabled people, population, push them down to the bottom of the list. They already have a 10-year waiting list. Over 5,000 people. These people are dying without getting put up in the list, and that is a huge problem. And I'd like to also have an included trigger so that we know how to deal with the federal government going below 90%. 90% in their refunds. But you know, if you look at all of the statistics, the largest single contributor to a decline in money for higher education comes from Obamacare expansion. And so statistics say that for every dollar spent on expansion, Obamacare expansion, $2.52 gets taken away from higher ed. So that there's a fine line to walk.
Well, then, since you mentioned higher ed, Barb, let's move on to a question that regarding things that have been in the news recently about higher ed in Kansas. And Emporia State, of course, we know has made some decisions there about restructuring and actual cuts of positions at that university. We just found out that there has been a decline in enrollment at Fort Hays State after many, many years of increasing. So what impacts do you see to the area economy, since we know, of course, that Fort Hays State is such a big employer? What is it going to do to this region and to the state?
Well, I think Fort Hays is in a really good spot right now, and they need to make sure that they pay attention to the fact that we don't have as many students. It's, you know, the birth rate is down. That's a fact. You know, I fully funded everything that Fort Hays asked for this session, and also made sure that I advocated for $5 million to renovate Gross Memorial Coliseum as well as getting them $500,000 to work on their cybersecurity program, which we all know is very important to have done. You know, the Board of Regents decides how much funding everyone has through the universities. So, you know, I think we need to be rethinking every one of our Board of Regents universities, because we need to make sure that we're getting rid of the programs that don't have a number of students, and then also see where they can make things work more efficiently to deal with the drop in enrollment and the issues that are going on for higher ed today.
So obviously these are the issues not only in Kansas but across the country, as we've been hearing about. Dr. Hammond, of course, you are a retired president of Fort Hays State University and were there for many years of those continuous enrollment growths. Now we see declines, and have heard what Emporia State is going to do, again with the permission of the Board of Regents. What is your reaction to that? How can the state legislature encourage higher ed continuation? And you mentioned the funding. How does your idea there come into it?
Well, first of all, Obamacare didn't create Medicaid expansion. Medicaid was founded in a bill that is 15 years older than the Obamacare bill. So you can call it whatever you want. It's still an important economic stimulus for Ellis County and for our district. On higher education, I know my opponent says that she's an advocate, but when you look at a budget and you see that basically Fort Hays and Wichita State are educating the same number of students, and we get 39 million and they get 84 million, that something doesn't make a lot of sense. An advocate would begin to ask, like the members of the committee have done before, ask the Board of Regents for an explanation about why there's such a big difference in the block grant. The kind of fundings that Barb is talking about, I applaud her for. What she did to support the university in certain program areas, and it was good that we had COVID money to use for the air conditioning of Gross Coliseum. But the bottom line is that she really isn't an advocate. She talks about us cannibalizing students by recruiting in the eastern part of the state. She talks in her committee also about duplication of programs. And so those are things, those are key words to our faculty that don't mean that she's an advocate.
All right. I want to stay on this topic, Dr. Hammond, and ask, there were some people tossing this around, happened to be around some current students at Fort Hays State recently, and they were concerned about what's going on. The question they had that they wanted me to pass along to you is it a good idea to specialize at each university and perhaps community college in Kansas the degrees and programs that are offered? And you know, you may want to go to an ag college and do agricultural business and have to go to K-State even though you live in Goodland. Would that work?
Well, if you follow my opponent's theory that you should go to college in the area where the college is, so you go to the closest college, then you need duplication. Because otherwise, if you're majoring in education and the college closest to you doesn't have it, you're going to find yourself in difficulty. So I really believe that you need to let the institutions create a role for themselves. That's what I did when I was there. When I came, we had something like 11 years of declining enrollments. We then changed things and migrated some resources to help certain programs, and as a result, over the time I was there, we tripled the enrollments. So it can be done very, very effectively. The other thing I think that can be done is we can engage the state in a more coordinated fashion than we currently do. We have 19 community colleges. We have a number of technical schools. Wichita State just acquired the technical school in Wichita, and as a result now has a big increase in enrollment because of that acquisition. And so I think we can coordinate better than we currently are coordinating among programs. But I don't think you only need one college of education in the state, or one college of agriculture in the state, or we have one vet college because that's pretty important, but there's only one. But in medical schools the same way, those are just too expensive to duplicate.
All right, thank you, Ed. Barb, let's ask you about, has there been any discussion that this might be a possibility, something the state should look at as specialization at each schools? What do you think? Would it work well?
Well, I've never said you have to go geographically by where you are. My problem with, in particular, K-State starting a nursing program, which is really expensive to implement during a time when we're shrinking in enrollments, when KU has a wonderful nursing program and so does Fort Hays. And so we have an opportunity to go to one or the other. Why would an agricultural school add a nursing degree into theirs? That was where I said, I don't want to cannibalize one another. Them starting one, then you go to KU or you go to Fort Hays or you go to Kansas State. Some of these decisions need to be made with some business sense. Does this make sense? Will we make money in this program? And let's be honest, they're looking for tuition dollars, and I completely understand that. And I have no problem with that. But we need to be wise in how we spend tax dollars and tuition dollars. And I have a lot of faith in the Regent schools. I think they're really working towards that and taking that very seriously.
All right. Well, let's stay on the topic of education and a little bit more about K through 12. There's been a lot of discussion about it locally in Kansas, across the nation. And in Kansas, the local control has really always been a bedrock of the public K through 12 schools. But the legislature has tried to intervene in the governing of local schools with legislation, last session's Parents' Bill of Rights. People probably heard about that. How can the legislature, Barb, strike a balance between individual rights of parents and then the governing local school boards? Or should the legislature even be involved?
Well, I think we need to be involved because the state of Kansas is, over half of our budget is spent on education, K through 12. So when you talk about almost $7 billion, I think it's incumbent upon us to go ahead and say, we want to make sure that our student scores go up. Our student scores have dropped precipitously since COVID, for sure, but they were low before. So I think it's when they start pushing parents out of decision making and they push things that don't reflect what really needs to be done for the classrooms and teachers. I think the teachers need more money. I don't think we need more money for other things that the Department of Education has control of. So there's so much I think we can do if we spend more money on the kids and the teachers. We will see the scores going up. But unfortunately, COVID really did kick them in the shins and hurt them. Even this year, I voted for over $360 million more for Math Nation to help the math scores go up, and also an additional $402 million so that for other programs to lift student scores and make sure that they're reading and doing math on grade level.
All right, Barb. Ed, you mentioned in your opening statement that that was one of the concerns people you've talked to have about funding for K through 12. What do you feel is the balance between parents' Bill of Rights, parents need to know about what their kids are doing in school, versus the local governing school boards, and should the legislature have a role in that?
The governing question is separate from the finance question. The governance question, I think, is a legitimate one. I believe in local governance. I believe in local elected school boards. I believe in getting the community fully involved in the program. And I think the role that the legislature has is to, according to the Kansas Supreme Court in Gannon, they set a standard for what we should be doing in the legislature in terms of funding education. And I'm very proud of my representative. She voted for House Bill 2512, which fully funded it. But then she also went and pulled special ed out, and instead of fully funding it at $675 million, she cut $155 million out of it. And what that did was cause the school districts then to have to move money out of their fully funded budget over to special ed. And in Hayes, that's $1.5 million, and that's 22 teaching positions.
All right. So you have basically started to answer my next question, Ed. Plans to return to funding for pre-pandemic higher education. We've talked about that, prior to maybe the pre-2015 levels, and this funding of the special ed programs. We hear a lot about it, and you just mentioned what has happened. How do we rectify that?
Well, first of all, there was a letter in the local press or on your channel, I believe, from some legislators from Wichita who were talking about that issue. And they referred to the fact that my opponent has fully funded special ed, and they said that she fully funded it and met the Gannon test. The Gannon Supreme Court decision doesn't even address special ed. It's the Montoy decision that addresses special ed. That's what sets the standard for special ed at a role this year that's supposed to be $670 million. And the fact that we don't fund it creates that problem for the school districts. Because if they don't move the money over and cover it, then parents are going to file suit because they have a right to those services. So the bottom line is that we played this little shell game in the legislature this year where we fully funded our K through 12 operational budget, but then we underfunded special ed knowing that they would have to move money over to cover that. And I think our kids, and the sad thing is that special ed services TMP, Holy Family, and the public schools in Victoria and Hayes as well. And so I believe it's very important that we fully fund special ed. And my opponent's candidate for governor recently said that special ed isn't being funded appropriately, and it's time for a bipartisan effort to get it fully funded.
Well, Barb, let's talk about that a little bit. I guess also for clarification, there are federal regulations regarding special education and what is expected of school districts.
Well, the federal government also puts money into special education, into each school in Kansas. And right now, the state Department of Education is hanging on to, let's see, about $10 million of federal funds through COVID funds for special education that they have not spent. And that's on the Kansas Department of Education website. So there's a lot of money that right now that they could be using. And we can certainly go and look into more detail for the next year, but they're not even spending the money now. That I don't understand. I think every child is important. I know that, special education isn't just learning difficulties, it's also gifted students too. So we need to be watching all of them. And I think in $7 billion, there should be some money right there for special education. The legislature had made an arbitrary equation, and it does not take into account what the feds are giving to them and what other funds that are going in. So I think what we need to do is really look at it and make sure that we've taken care of things.
We'll see what happens.
Okay.
Let's talk about the kids, but in a different vein now, child care.
Child care,
And we know that is a problem across the country, a critical issue in Hayes and in many towns, many areas throughout Northwest Kansas. What can the state do to help ease the burden on parents? And I know in Hayes anyway, there was a quiz taken, an inquiry of parents, and a lot of people were staying home because they could not get childcare. Therefore, we have some jobs opening, you know,
Right.
kind of a domino effect. So anyway, what could the state legislature do about that for childcare and help parents get back in the workforce?
Well, as chair of Joint Rules and Regs, something came through recently where the state tried to start counting children up to the age of 16 as the count for child care facilities, where if you had a 16-year-old child, you had to count that in. They pulled it back because of things that, complaints. So what I hear from child care people is that it's highly regulated, it's very strict and very onerous on some of the regulations. So I think the state can try to get them to loosen up some of that to make things, you know, there's always a pendulum. We need to take care of the kids, and then we over-regulate. So I think there's a happy medium, and I think through Joint Rules and Regs, I can help do that because I have been very much involved. I go to the child care meetings. Right now, the child care task force through the chamber wants to do something about a sub-pool for daycares, which has been a problem that I've been working on for foster care as well, where you need to be able to have some respite care. And when they set up those regulations, I think they need to make sure that if you're having your parent come in and help you for an hour while you take someone to a doctor's appointment, that they don't have to go through everything that a full-time child care expert or daycare has to do. So I think there are a lot of things we can do differently.
Okay, Ed, if you're elected, what would you do differently than the state's doing right now regarding child care?
Well, I certainly wouldn't talk about the problem of grandparents coming and looking after a kid. That's why you have to go take one to the doctor. I think the important thing is, I do believe that my opponent's correct. I believe some of the regulations need to be reviewed. They were written at a time when child care wasn't as important right now. Mm-hmm. If you look at the labor market, one of the things that COVID has done is it significantly shrunk the labor market. And one of the areas that it has impacted is women in the workplace or men in the workplace, if they're the stay-at-home mm-hmm. husbands, as we're beginning to see occur more and more. Mm-hmm. And so we could, I think, go a long way in getting a better labor pool for our community if we had a successful child care initiative. And I'm really pleased to see and learn about the Hayes Med Center child care facility that's underway. I think that's a major step in the right direction. The university has expanded and remodeled its facility. And I think we as a community need to continue to look at child care as a major issue along with housing.
All right. Well, let's talk about something totally different now. On a national basis, we've heard all kinds of things about this. It's filtered down to the states, including Kansas. The 2020 election. Unfounded election fraud allegations have permeated every level of government. First of all, Ed, do you believe that the 2020 election results were accurate or fraudulent? This is a two-part question. And part two, if elected as a state representative, what would you do to ensure that Kansans understand that the results from the elections are indeed accurate?
Well, first of all, I believe they're accurate. I believe our Secretary of State, who's a good Fort Hays alum, did a good job of documenting that. And so I'm not sure there's a need for legislation in the state of Kansas. I believe that with the safeguards that he's got in place, we are in very good shape.
All right. Barb, as the current state rep, probably you've heard a lot of comments about this. First of all, do you believe that the 2020 election was accurate or was it fraudulent? And then if you're reelected as state representative, what do you think that it could do to ensure Kansans that in fact the election results are correct and accurate?
You know, Scott Schwab's done an excellent job, and he's really checked into as much as he can and trying to make everything as smooth sailing. And I think the biggest evidence of this is all the recounts that or requested, and the counts came in within 2 votes, 3 votes, that's pretty impressive. So I think the state of Kansas has done an excellent job. I can't speak for other states. So I just am pleased with how our state elections are being run. And I know that the elections committee is always looking into how can we make this even better? I mean, is there some place we can polish this? And Scott has always been Johnny on the spot to do it. And so I think we're very fortunate in Ellis County in Kansas, because we have people that care that much. So
You got great grades in math.
Okay, Barb, we're going to talk a little bit now about entrepreneurship. You mentioned in your opening statement that you are a small business owner, so you're familiar with that on a very micro level. Of course, it's been the cornerstone of revitalization in a lot of communities, especially small towns across northwest Kansas. What can the state do if you're reelected? Is there something different or better or new that the state could do to help entrepreneurs?
Well, I think this year we did a lot of things. We've done moderate housing grants, and those are they're being applied for now. I've gotten lots of requests for recommendations that they receive it. So between helping with taking taxes off in other areas, we can help people achieve things in business. And I know it's not easy. I remember years ago, praying over checks to make sure we had enough to pay our employees when Travenol closed and all of the things.
Yes.
I mean, I've experienced all of it. We have a small business. We understand what it is, and I think that between the university doing an entrepreneurship program and Grow Hayes, I think Doug Williams has done a great job, and his staff, they are always trying to find some way to look around at a situation. And in fact, I want to give Dave Van Doren a little bit of a push. He just came back from South America and said, we have to have green space around housing projects. He put a tank underneath parking lots so that they kept water and they were able to use that again. So there are so many ways through the taxation committee, which I'm on, and things that the legislature can do to help make things available for people to succeed.
All right. Ed, you probably are familiar with some of the entrepreneurship programs and positions and ideals that Fort Hays State has championed over the years. If you're elected to the legislature, how could that grow? How can we improve that for small towns in northwestern Kansas?
Well, I didn't run a small business. We had $100 and some million budget. But we learned how to work together. We learned how to cooperate with people across the aisle if we needed to, or in the administration. And probably one of the things that very few people know about is that Fort Hays is the home for small business development in the state of Kansas. So all the small business development centers are part of Fort Hays. And that came about because Gary Shearer was lieutenant governor when I was president, and Bill was the governor. So we worked together to try to get SBDC back in the state. It had been a Wichita State, and the federal government took it away because it wasn't being run properly. And we were able to get it back. It was important, though, that we had federal and state partners involved. And one of my worries going forward in 2005 and to 2015 was the state seemed to want to cut back on their share of the SBDC activity. SBDC is one of the most important elements of small business support in the state of Kansas, or in any state, and we need to do everything we can to keep it. On a local matter, Hays and a lot of our rural communities, housing is a critical part of it. And so if I were elected, I would take the Rural Housing Initiative, which was funded with COVID money this year instead of general fund money, and move it into general fund to guarantee that it's going to be funded. And we've got $2 billion in reserves. So if we're ever going to make an investment and begin to fix some of the things in the state of Kansas, now is the time to make that investment because we've got the resources to cope with it successfully.
All right.
And
Well, our time is
Okay.
up on that question, Ed, but I want to talk a little bit more about business in a slightly different vein. One of the concerns of Hayes businesses, and I think it's probably true across northwest Kansas and other more populated portions of Kansas, lack of available workers. Who can you hire? We're having problems with that. The jobless level now back to pre-pandemic levels, but what can we do? What could the state do? If you're elected as a state representative, Ed, what would you do to maybe attract more people to the labor pool to ensure that the economy continues to grow, that people are hired and in turn spending money?
well, I think there's a number of things that work that we can do, and we've done it in some cases. Vet medicine, and in our doctor's program at KU, we pay off a lot of their debt if they will come work in a rural community. And I think we can look for that in engineering. We can move it into other areas as well, tie the financial aid programs to people staying in Kansas for a certain number of years. We can also attract more people to Kansas. I think Fort Hays is on the cutting edge of that by having their regional tuition, and we'll begin to see how effective it is recruiting young people. There's a lot of studies that have been done that show that there is a high correlation between people staying within a few hundred miles of where they went to college. And so if we can bring more people from out of state because of the high quality institutions we have in Kansas, I think then we'd be able to have more engineers and more nurses and hopefully more teachers as well. We've got to increase the teacher pay, but there's an agreement to get that done. There's supposed to be a CPI increase in the Gannon court decision that goes into effect this year, and I'm hopeful that that can get funded and we can begin to get teachers paid at the level that they should be.
All right. Well, Barb, again, back to the basis of this question is about the jobless levels and finding employees, and I know in Hayes it's been a real problem, even with so many college students that are here. What can the state do if you're reelected? Is there some program or that needs to be instituted, anything different, or concentrate on something that already exists?
Well, I think removing the food sales tax is one thing that helps. There were people paying less for their groceries. Now, the first year that was run, in tax, where I was one of the sponsors, it had a dedicated funding source, and it was vetoed by the governor. We put it in another bill. The next time, she line item vetoed that. So then this third time, now we're not sure. I can't commit funds that we don't know we already have. We're heading into a recession from every thing that I see. So right now, the things that we can do is we're lowering food sales tax, and it will be gone within 3 years. We've removed the sales tax on agricultural fencing. That helps farmers. We also need to stop taxing our seniors' retirement income, and that's of huge importance because we're losing people within our age group. They're moving away because they don't get taxed in Oklahoma. So why not go to Oklahoma? We've got to if we keep our families here and our seniors here, we'll start to see better growth, I think. There's so much we can do, and I'm proud that we've done a lot for it.
Barb, you used the magical phrase, our age group. In my discussion with, and we're all about the same age, but in my discussion with Fort Hays State University students, they were, and these are, 18 to 20-year-olds. And another question they wanted me to ask, how can the state, and you specifically, if elected as a state representative once again, how can you help younger Kansans thrive when it seems like generally we have an older population of politicians, and we see that a lot at the national level. We hear about that a lot. But these younger people are saying they feel left out, that they're not part of the community, they're not being listened to about their needs and their wants. If you were reelected, how would you help focus on young voters and convince them that they are important to the state of Kansas?
There's someone who won her first election to the State House by 35 votes. I can tell you every single vote counts. And we have tried, I tried as a local government leader to include Fort Hays State students and get them to become more interested in and cater to them. And I think the Downtown Development Corporation has done a great job. They've been doing town-to-gown events, and they've been trying to pull them in. But we have to remember too, college students, within a college, it by itself is a community. I mean, literally is its own little metropolis. And so we have to figure out, and they have to make the effort as well. I mean, we have to get it together and make sure that we're bringing them in, because it's wrong to think that we don't care about these kids. We do. And I know that the city of Hays is trying to pull them in all the time in all different ways. So I'm proud of what our local organizations have done to include Fort Hays and these students. You know, it ebbs and flows, and I think, unfortunately, COVID kind of put the kibosh on some of it. We got to get that back alive and relit so that they know that they're just as important as anyone else in this town.
Right. Ed, what are your thoughts on how to convince the younger Kansans that they are important to the state, and we know that they don't vote very often or very well, feeling like my vote doesn't count. How can you convince them otherwise if you're elected?
Well, I think in the recent primary, we saw a lot more younger voters than we had seen in a long time. So I think a lot has to do with issues and communications with them. So I agree with what my opponent is saying about, you know, involvement. I think that our leadership program at Fort Hays has benefited our community tremendously by having the students all do projects in their senior year. Some of those things have turned into Frost Fest and all kinds of other activities that are fun. But we have to begin to address their needs, and they are finding it difficult to own a home because of property taxes. And, you know, but yet my opponent and some of her colleagues refused to fund the local ad valorem tax reduction fund, which was designed by the legislature and put into practice in the state of Kansas many years ago, and up until in recent years was always funded. And the purpose was to give the county and the city resources to buy down the property tax. And I think if we are successful in reducing the tax burden on younger people, they will get more involved and they will be more available to us in this state.
All right. Taxes. That's, you know, probably nobody wants to pay them, but they do help run our state. I have talked to people, Ed, who feel like there are some opportunities for a tax to be implemented for a certain project, but it seems like it never goes away, or our budgets never decrease when there is extra money. The current governor might disagree with that. She's put out a lot of information about paying off some debt that the state had incurred. But how do you tell the average Kansan that, you know, these taxes are important and they may go up or they may go down? As a state representative, if you're elected, can you tell them they'll go down or they'll go away?
Well, given the fact we got $2 billion in round numbers in surplus right now, for the first time in the history of my involvement in the state, which is 30-some years, we have a rainy day fund of $970 million. And the last time I checked, our tax revenues were running ahead by about $400 million. So there's lots of resources right now to begin to invest in restructuring. Kansas, when it was most prosperous a number of years ago, was operating on a three-legged stool. And we played around with that that stool. Property tax, sales tax, and income tax. They used to be equal. If you go back far enough in history, they were all basically equal. And so I think I don't have a problem saying I don't see a tax increase coming. I see, hopefully, that we can cut taxes with the revenues that we have. But we have to be careful because Barb's correct. We're entering a difficult economic time, and we don't want to spend all that money. I don't understand why she voted against just eliminating the tax. We've got the money. We could have done all the food tax at one time. We didn't need to spread it out over 3 years.
All right. Well, that might be a good example, Barb, of something that many people have a question about. But you hear people comparing Kansas to other states, and Kansas does seem to have higher taxes and more taxes. And nobody wants to pay taxes. So what's the solution if you're reelected?
Well, trying to reduce taxes as we go along. I had a dedicated funding source, what we figured out. A dedicated funding source with third-party marketplace facilitators on internet tax. That money would have gone directly to dropping the food sales tax, and it would have been gone by now. Right now, when we see that we need to keep some money in the rainy day fund, it's just like when you have your own business. You don't know whether your boiler is going to crash, or you need to have some money set aside so you can pay for those unexpected things. We have paid down CAPERS, the Kansas Public Employees Retirement Fund. We have put in $1.5 billion into that retirement fund to make sure that we take care of the teachers and the public employees so that they have their retirement funds. We've tried to use the COVID funds in the most fiscally responsible way, and making other years of legislators having to pay for something that we just decided that we had enough money right now. It's foolish to just spend it all and think, well, we have plenty of money, so we can just do this. And reducing the food sales tax will continue for years. We've lost that income from that. And I don't have a problem with that, but we need to make sure that we're doing it in a way that we don't have to pull it back.
All right. Well, we have enough time left for about one more question, it looks like. And Barb, I wanted to return to you and talk about a topic that is very important in Hays and also the rest of Kansas when it comes to water supply. Of course, the city of Hays, as you both know, concerned about a long-term water supply and working on a project in Edwards County with the R9 Ranch that it jointly owns with the city of Russell. The state's aquifer, and Hays is not on an aquifer, which is one of the problems, if you will. But as the aquifers across Kansas are drained, and we think about the Ogallala, which is to the west of Hays, water is an issue for all of us, especially in western Kansas. So what can the state do to help balance the needs between agriculture, which needs water, and industry, which needs water, and people who need water? What do you see as is the future? What would you do if reelected?
It is a fine line, but we have been pushing LEMAs, which are local management areas and it's worked beautifully in northwest Kansas, where a group of agricultural leaders and owners reduced their amount of water used for agriculture. And what they did was change how they water their crops when they have irrigation equipment. And it's worked beautifully. And the aquifer raise went up when they started to do that. But we've got to get the whole state to be a part of it. And I've always said that the city of Hays is the poster child of conservation. We have washing machine rebates, we have toilet rebates. We are using less water than the city did in probably 1973, in the 70s. So I think we all need to get on that conservation part of it, and I think if we all do our part, whether you're in agriculture or in a private home, if we all do our part, we can make this last. And I think the R9 Ranch is an excellent example of two cities working together and getting something done so that they can have a water source. And they said they would take less than far less than any kind of agricultural use. So I'm proud of the city of Hayes.
All right. Ed, if you're elected to the legislature, what would you do about spreading the message about the importance of water across Kansas and the reality of declining aquifers?
Well, first of all, I believe that water is a product that's owned by somebody, usually the landowner, and I'm opposed to changing that fundamental policy that is underlying our procedures. So I don't see any really major change in water policy, but I do agree that some of the voluntary efforts that we've seen in Northwest Kansas can be used in other places as well. I think that is clearly the case. Our agricultural community are some of our best conservation people. They really are. They know their future, and the future of their kids depends upon protecting that resource. And that's what's driving a lot of what I've seen occur in Northwest Kansas. And I think that it'll happen in other parts of the state as long as we don't try to take away their right for the water. They've got rights that need to be protected.
All right. Well, we have reached our time for the end of questions, but we want to be sure and give the candidates time for their closing statements this evening. And again, as we did the coin toss right before the show started, that will give Ed Hammond the opportunity to have the final closing statement. So Barb, we'll start with you and have you talk to us a little bit about your final thoughts this evening.
Okay. You know, I've never cared about the titles that you receive when you're in office, and currently the title of representative does not make me important, but the job is really important, and I take it very seriously. During COVID, I was working every day. I had to set office hours because I was working late into the night and early in the morning, helping people get their unemployment. I never asked what party they belonged to. I just took care of everyone, and that's what you have to do in this position. The last 2 days of the session this year, I helped Fort Hayes get a law passed, put it into statute that the graduates of the master's degree of social work could get their licenses when the bureaucrats in Topeka said, no, we decided you can't do it until for another 6 months. I got that taken care of. Small business owner, local government background, local control for sure. I serve my constituents while I pay off debt, and we paid off and saved millions in interest while paying off bonds in the state. I ask that you continue to send me to Topeka to do the work of my constituents, whether it's answering questions, getting food stamps payments made, or getting a bill passed for Fort Hays State University. I'm always ready to help. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Barb Wasinger. And finally, we go to Ed Hammond. And Dr. Hammond, your concluding thoughts this evening on why people should vote for you as representative of the 111th District.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for watching, and I hope that it's been enlightening for you. Secondly, I think that the main reason why I would hope you'd vote for me is because I'm a proven leader, and I'm a proven advocate. You know what I've been able to do in Topeka over the years for Fort Hays State, and I want to do the same thing for you. The difference between myself and my opponent is that she is ambitious. She says that it doesn't matter what she's running for, but I keep hearing she wants to run for a higher office. So I'm not sure exactly what the motivation is, but I know what my motivation is, and that is to meet the needs of the citizens of our district in an effective way, as a strategic advocate, concentrate on the things that will really improve our economy and help our community. And I thank KOD and Eagle Family again for hosting this wonderful event, and I look forward to another opportunity to discuss the differences that exist between myself and Representative Wasinger.
Thank you, Dr. Ed Hammond. Again, concluding statements this evening from our two candidates for the 111th district in the state of Kansas, which of course includes the city of Hays, also Munger and Victoria, and 3 or 4 of the townships immediately outside of Hays. I want to thank Barb Wasinger and Ed Hammond both so much for joining us this evening, and thank you also for your service work. Both of you, you're well-known people throughout the community, throughout the state, and you both are dedicated people and have done so much to help so many people. And I want to comment on that and thank you for that. And we're fortunate to have people such as yourselves who want to get even further involved in what goes on in the state of Kansas. Again, a thank you this evening to Smoky Hills Public Television. This has been a program in partnership with Hays Post, where I'm an employee, and of course Hays Post is part of the Eagle Communications Group. And a thank you particularly to the news staff at Hays Post for many of our questions this evening, and the Fort Hays State University students that I've talked to that had a couple of questions they wanted to ask. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We want to encourage you to stay in touch with the candidates, stay in touch with the issues, and don't forget to vote on November 8th. It's right around the corner. Thanks for joining us. I'm Becky Kaiser.
In our increasingly electrified society, that's where a resilient grid matters most. ITC Great Plains is ensuring the greater grid can meet our energy needs now and long into the future. Learn more at itc-holdings.com.